It was any other Friday in the year 2015. I was year 8 and I had scouts in the evening after school. I was going to walk there with a friend, so I swung by his house about an hour before scouts started so we could hang out a bit and then walk over. But when I got there, he was watching this show, and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, though I'd occasionally heard its name mentioned offhandedly. It was a show called Attack on Titan. The irony of me finding out about Attack on Titan before going to Scouts is not lost on me. I would watch Attack on Titan myself, except I would watch it in the original Japanese with subtitles. After finishing it, I decided I wanted to watch more anime series, contributing to a watch list that at present stands in the hundreds. On the 14th of May 2017, exactly 8 years before I'm uploading this video, I started a YouTube channel where I would talk about anime. My interest in anime is what prompted me to start learning Japanese and eventually start living and working in Japan, so you could say it's had a bit of an impact. I've spent 10 years watching anime, and having spent a solid 4/5 of that time also making videos discussing anime, I feel I shouldn't waste this opportunity. Whenever I want to enjoy myself, I find myself watching an episode of anime, so this begs the question, what keeps me coming back, besides a Peter Pan complex? To answer that, it may be worth analysing what I thought of anime before I started it. Before I became an anime fan, if you had asked me what I thought of anime, I would have probably replied by saying, anime is weird. But now, having been through a full decade of watching hundreds of different anime, things have changed. If you ask me to describe what I think of anime, then I would say anime is weird. And it needs to be. But that doesn't sound very insightful. It's hard to sum up anime neatly in one sentence, since one of the strengths of anime is the variety of stories, styles, and genres within it, which obviously won't be able to fit into just a few words. If you want to see what anime means to people, then there's plenty of videos on this site which have served as tributes to anime. One of my favourites being an AMV by JL. Their tribute to anime ticks all of my boxes. It's got footage from a lot of my favourite shows, an emotional cover of I Really Want to Stay at Your House, and Lord of the Rings quotes. At this stage, that's practically cheating. I do want to focus on the latter part of that list though, because I think Tolkien is a surprisingly good starting point for this video about anime. If you're allergic to tangents, this video is going to prove fatal for you. Tolkien was a man who had firm beliefs which he wanted to express, as well as a niche interest in Old English he could write at length about, yet he also knew that there was something exciting about hearing a good story and exploring a new world completely detached from ours. From this, Tolkien created Middle-earth. It might not seem it now that it's the basis for every modern fantasy setting, but back then, Middle-earth and all the stories exploring it were considered pretty weird, since it was like nothing else. The reason it was like nothing else is because Tolkien dared to dream of a world separate from ours, full of things that he found cool, and devoted himself to telling the best stories he could in this world, directly avoiding allegorical elements because he wanted these stories to be about Middle-earth. Lord of the Rings was made by someone who was committed to their fiction, no matter how strange. And that's what I see in all of the anime I've loved over the past decade. Everyone who makes fiction in some way makes a world, and this is doubly true for animation. Unlike films and TV series that are live action, there is no element of reality that has been recorded through a camera. Instead, every element of every scene has to be created from the ground up. The amount of work that goes into making a single episode of even a relatively low-profile anime series is mind-blowing. However, this hard work doesn't go into making an anime realistic. Anime is no stranger to high-concept fiction, but even anime that are set in the real world have something about them that prevents them from feeling real. Maybe it's a small detail, maybe it's too big detail. No matter what it is, there's something in there that makes you think, I'm not watching real people. But the reason we're willing to put up with it is because anime doesn't aim to be realistic. It aims to be immersive. This is where I'd like to talk about my favourite series of all time, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. This show is a masterpiece. We all know that. Especially if, like me, this was one of the first anime series you ever watched. It tackles heavy themes and also develops its characters in ways that feel poignant and stick with you forever. But it does so in a world that is unlike ours. Amestris is inspired by our world, but it is completely alien when you look at the kinds of things that can happen. However, these fictional elements are treated as part of the world and taken seriously within the context of it. Many of these elements are ways of expressing expressing the themes and characters of the show in ways that just aren't possible if you tether it to reality. These are characters with extraordinary powers, but ones whose struggles are recognizable, even if the specific details of those struggles are not exact ones that you or I have been through. And that's the power of good fiction. In anime, Sirius can be depicted weirdly, because this is animation. Reality left the building when you started being able to draw it however you wanted it to look. The inverse of this, however, is also true. In anime, weird can be depicted seriously. Sure, Fullmetal Alchemist is pretty tame compared to most anime, but that doesn't exactly mean that cool fights between chemistry wizards and sexy demons are exactly something you see every day in reality. There are plenty of things which were included just because Hiromu Arakawa thought, I think that's cool, and enough people saw what Arakawa thought was cool and thought, yeah, this is cool, which then prompted Studio Bones to make something that stood as a tribute to how cool the manga was by trying to make the anime just as cool. Is it weird that one of the highest ranking generals in the army is a flamboyant geezer who shows off more muscles than the Cornish gastropub? Yes. Does the show treat it just as seriously as it treats philosophical discussion? Also yes. The best anime are ones which are made by people who still have the youthful idealism to say, I think this thing is cool no matter how weird, coupled with a mature outlook on the world and the adult work ethic to bring it to life through a complete devotion to making quality fiction and the realization of a new world. That's something that I love in anime. Although, it's not something that's only in anime. Isn't it just true for all good fiction? Well, that's true, but anime is different from a lot of other examples because of the culture that created it. At its most basic definition, anime is Japanese animation. So obviously, if one is to understand anime, they should at least be partially acquainted with Japan. One of the reasons anime is so unique is because there is no country quite like Japan. I mean, an island nation with a constitutional monarchy who made curry so spiceless that India refused to recognize it? That's crazy, bro. Let's establish something very important off the bat. I'm not Japanese. But even those who know basically nothing about Japan have to admit it's a place with an incredibly unique history, geography, and society. And that's obviously something that's going to be reflected in the creative works that are produced there. Even anime in non-Japanese settings feel inherently Japanese in one way or another. As someone from the UK who fell in love with anime, the foreign nature of it was part of the allure, was something from a world away, entirely different, yet was still able to speak to things that I felt, even if I didn't quite understand it. And that is one of the reasons that Your Name is my favorite movie of all time. It's only recently dawned on me how this was one of the first anime to truly get me to think about Japan. I watched this film for the first time in April 2017, and while by that point I had watched shows that were set in Japan, and even shows which dealt with distinctly Japanese subject matter, namely that scene in Sword Art Online where Asuna gets molested by tentacle monsters, none had truly felt as inherently Japanese as Your Name did. The Japanese cultural influences of Your Name go to a surface level, since the film features real Japanese locations brought to life in vivid detail. However, Japanese culture permeates the core of this film as well. Going deeper than the visuals, there's a plot that covers disaster in a way that felt particularly resonant to a post-2011 Japan, though still echoed sentiments of previous Japanese generations who also lived in the shadows of destructive events. It contained snatches of life of the urbanites and the Innaka in a way that made it feel more realistic, but the film had to be animated in order to draw on the elements of Japanese folklore and spiritualism in the way it did. This is the kind of story that could only be made in Japan by someone Japanese. I repeat, it can only be made in Japan by someone Japanese. JJ, put your hands above your head and step away from the franchise. Your Name was one of the first big non-franchise and non-Ghibli anime movies to hit the international box office in the way it did, and I think a big draw of this film was because of how Japanese it felt. It was a film about two people yearning for that dreamlike thing that's out there, and not only is this a universal feeling that we've all had at some point, especially in our adolescence, but it's also sort of how a lot of international anime fans view Japan. Is the misguided view? Absolutely, but it speaks to how anime is able to interest people in other countries. It's inspired thousands, if not millions, to start learning more about Japan, to start studying Japanese, or even to move to Japan. All of that cultural fascination because of people who wanted to find out the source of the anime they loved so much. That's why many, myself definitely included, when I first visit Japan for the first time, receive a grand revelation when I see that anime is much more popular there than it is in other countries. But it's still viewed as pretty weird. What? a country of 120 million people, and all of them are into anime, you're having a laugh. A lot of aspects of anime, including some of the stranger ones, have origins in Japanese culture, but that doesn't exactly mean that everyone Japanese is into anime. Sure, it was invented by Hokusai, but your average Japanese person is going to be as weirded out as your average Westerner when you bring up the concept of tentacle porn. There are long-running anime series like Sazae-san and Anpanman, which are cultural institutions in Japan, but the anime that you and me associate with anime have appeals that are much more subcultural or even countercultural. If one is to understand the state of anime, one must understand otaku. The word can be translated as geek, nerd, fan, or first word in title of mid-YouTube channel, depending on the context. But in this context, otakus are essentially the devotees of anime culture, whose niche interests and outsider customs have shaped anime as we know it. Because of this, some have decried the otaku for driving the industry into being hollow escapism for this subculture of nerds. I don't hold this opinion because, as you probably get from the previous sections of this vid, I enjoy escapism, and I believe that the way anime does it is far from hollow. Though I'm not going to deny that there are some lazy power fantasies or boring self-insert romances in anime. While I don't exactly encourage them, I can tolerate them. After all, anime is a form of entertainment, so I'm not going to complain if a show is trying to entertain people. What? You watch anime to enjoy yourself? How fucking dare you? Next you'll be telling me you make your own opinions instead of copying them from video essayists. You sicken me. But shows that rely on pandering to otakus do not really aspire to say or do all that much, and don't make for that interesting of a watch. However, the way to deal with otaku pandering in anime is not to flip it to the other end and chastise the otaku. Otaku were essential in the codification of anime, and those who disrespect their elders are always on a collision course with hubris. What I love are anime that understand the mindset of the otaku, sympathize with these outsiders, but do not devolve into empty wish fulfillment and instead focus on telling a good story. Look at the isekai genre. There's bland MCs which are easy to identify with strewn all over the place. Then you get shows like Mushoku Tensei or Zenshu, which will explore their otaku leads as much as the world they're thrust into, and respect them enough to put both their positives and negatives on full display to the audience. However, this is my video, and to me there is no anime that captures this dichotomy between the otaku ideal and the real world better than The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. While overlooked by many new anime fans, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya is a cultural cornerstone of anime in the 2000s, creating a full revolution where it was the name on everyone's lips and developing a fanbase that was one of the first to truly spread through the internet. But at the heart of the show itself, Haruhi has something to say about escapism. The narrator and main character is Kyon, a snarky realist who ends up having to acknowledge that his world is made better by the interjection of the unexplainable. The person around whom all these fantastical events revolve, the titular Haruhi Suzumiya, who is driven to melancholy by the sheer mundanity of reality. Yay, I said the thing. Her refusal to stop chasing the fantastical and the impossible has led her to being a bit of an outcast, something many otaku can probably relate to. Haruhi's journey is one where she learns that if one closes themselves off to the possibility that wonder exists in the real world, then they will never find it. Haruhi and Kyon both learning to respect each other's point of view is a brilliant central dynamic, and around it is the fact that this show mixes fantasy and sci-fi anime tropes with high school slice of life anime tropes. I think this certainly was part of the initial appeal to me, because it was the first time I watched something that was even remotely considered a slice of life. No, I watched it a full 10 years after Haruhi's moment in the sun had faded. Even I had to react to the anime by saying, as in, my memories of this magical monument to manifesting miracles are marvellous. This modestly mainstream masterpiece may have muffled moe and managed to markedly master the meta of anime, to put it mildly. Only a mere moron would mutter at mystery that's managed to mesmerize millions. Maybe modernity mandates manufactured moralistic madness mask the melancholy and make it more mundane, which is mental to me. This magnificent marvel matters so much to many, so measures to mitigate malignment are a must. Though, I might mention a motive of mine to minimize modification is to maintain a method of monitoring the Kuru's massive milkers. So, those are the three ingredients of what an anime should be. If we use these as a basis, can the anime that represents anime at its peak be found? An anime which was made by people who cared deeply about their fiction, was Japanese as shit, and understood the otaku mentality perfectly? Well, you don't need to search very far, because it does exist. And it's called Girls and Panzer. Girls and Panzer is a show about high school girls fighting each other in tanks. It's fucking good, mate. Girls and Panzer is not my favourite anime. I'm not even sure it makes my top 10. However, there's a purity within it that I wish every anime could have, as it has soul with a capital S. With a premise that specific, it should be obvious why it would appeal to otaku, be it the anime viewers or the surprising amount of military buffs who don't even watch other anime who love this show. There's a character within the series who acts as their proxy, Yukari, who is the resident tank obsessive, or Gunji Otaku. But despite being just as knowledgeable about tanks as many of the audience are, that doesn't always put her in the driver's seat of the plot, and she's given an arc of learning to connect with others through her fixation, showing someone who is undoubtedly an otaku, yet someone who is still willing to change themselves, which makes for a wonderful arc. As for being Japanese, this show is just Japanese-style inter-school sports competitions taken to their logical extreme. Add on to this the amount of repping it did for the town of Oarai in Ibaraki, bringing attention to how the town was starting to feel left behind in a way that led to the real-life area receiving a vital boost to tourism from otakus. As for the creative vision, shining through the series, there's that pure idealism of a creator who thought, I want to make something I think is cool and to show it to the people out there who also think it's cool. As much as the creators cared about the tanks, they cared about the girls inside the tanks as well. There's a desire to root for all these characters, and seeing them work to achieve their goals is a pleasure to watch. The anime studio itself was also working hard to achieve their goals, since this show did things with CG that were actually quite revolutionary back in 2012. But outside of those three elements, Girls and Panzer did something else that I think every anime should do. It surprised me. It was simple, but I was not expecting this show to do what it did in the way it did, and I could not have been happier. That's why I can't find myself getting cynical about anime. No matter what the industry keeps putting out, there's still something every season that surprises me. Even series that I don't particularly enjoy have at least one thing that's a pleasant surprise in them, and that gives them a fond place in my heart. And sometimes, an anime does something so surprising that it changes everything. Attack on Titan was the first anime I ever watched, but it was not the first one I fell in love with. I liked it, while knowing it was flawed when I watched that first season in 2015. As time dragged on, my attention began to wander towards the plethora of other shows that were vying for it. Yet, just as Attack on Titan was about to fade into the background of my thoughts in 2019, the show surprised me. It surprised me even more than it did when I first saw it at that friend's house in 2015. It did something I was not expecting, as there was a jolt of quality that raised the show to new heights. And then it kept doing it again and again. Every new part of Attack on Titan after Season 3, nay, every new episode managed to surprise me in ways that made me regret underestimating it earlier. Attack on Titan's popularity went from seasonal to generational. Eren went from the worst part of the show to one of the most fascinating things happening in anime, period. And that wasn't something anyone had on the cards a decade ago from the show where the steampunk Spider-Men fight the flesh mechas. In 2023, the show ended, and while it wasn't perfect, it's still pretty darn close to perfect. However, with the end of this grand saga might have come the end of a personal saga. Attack on Titan was the thing that started me down the path of watching anime when I was a young, naive year 8, and ended several years after I became an adult. Seeing it end only encouraged me to keep walking this path. I hope that I keep watching anime for many years to come. I hope that it continues to surprise me. If you are watching this video, and you just happen to be myself in the future, this video is to you 10 years from now. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how you're doing. And I don't even know if you'll remember this. But my decade of watching anime has taught me one thing that I do know. You are into some weird shit, man.